nation's birthday, but can we celebrate our country without worshiping it? Let's talk about it with Paul D. Miller on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here. In case you're wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter, our executive producer, is here. Matthew wonders how on a website cookies enhance performance, but in real life, not so much. And our producer, Jinx, is in the little glass booth. He's a simple guy. He knows if a man has only 7 fingers, Jinx listens to that man about fireworks safety. And our one-man IT department, John Myers, is here in his tech bunker. John fixes so many things, he doesn't even like the phrase summer break. And Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. We're recording this in May, but it's airing in July. That means it was your birthday a few days ago. So happy belated birthday. That's confusing. And
where's my cake?
And Kathy Wyatt is the soft feminine side of the program. Kathy, I'm sorry that your church didn't pick your patriotic theme for the 4th of July, red, white, and Lutheran.
That would have been nice.
Listen,
Matthew.
I could see that.
In fact, it gets tiring, frankly. She at one time was saved and a Presbyterian, and then she betrayed her heritage and became a Lutheran.
I'm not going to lie.
And if I didn't like Martin Luther so much, I probably would be far more upset than I am.
I got some Lutherans that
I
are
have
quite
nothing
friendly.
to say.
I'm leaning your way, Kathy.
Hey, we have a great guest, Paul D. Miller. And Paul, we've been interviewing a couple of times another Paul Miller. I don't know if you're familiar with him. His father, Jack Miller, was one of the forefathers of the modern grace movement. And Paul has written things. I don't think you're as religious as he is. And I was kind of looking forward to some God talk, but we're going to talk flag talk. And that's going to be good. Paul D. Miller is a professor of the practice of international affairs at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service and is the co-chair of the Global Politics Security Concentration. He spent a decade in public service as director of Afghanistan and Pakistan on the National Security Council staff, an intelligence analyst for the CIA, and a military intelligence officer in the U.S. Army. Paul's writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Mere Orthodoxy, the Gospel Coalition, among many others, and his latest book is The Religion of American Greatness, What's Wrong with Christian Nationalism. Paul, I know how busy you are, and I appreciate very much you taking your time to be with us.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I appreciate it. And the other Paul Miller, all Paul Millers were the same person. I just changed my middle initial depending upon the subject.
Smart branding.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Go royalties.
Listen, the real reason we have you on is given your background and the people that you know and the things that you do. We expect you to share with us some secrets that we can't get from the media.
The aliens are real.
And that's what I was going to ask.
Yes.
They just don't want to
Heard it here first.
What is, you know, I've got a disclaimer I've got to give you before we go any further. I'm a Burkean conservative. I'm to the right of Genghis Khan, and I always, and you shouldn't say bad things about people who are dead, but I always thought that Rush Limbaugh was a communist. I was so far to the right. So you will know where I'm coming from as we talk. But what is the difference between Christian nationalism and patriotism?
Yeah,
and
it's a
is
great
one
place to start
okay?
the conversation.
Yeah.
And, I hope you appreciated that I did quote Burke in the book approvingly, his famous quote about the little platoons that make up society and how our affections should be trained to the next most outward circle and then outward and on into the nation and all of humanity.
Yeah.
So I think I appreciate Burke's influence as well. The difference between Christian nationalism and patriotism is a great question. I call myself a patriot very happily. I'm a veteran, served in the Army, served our country, happy to wave the flag. Yesterday, I took my kids, my family, to a Memorial Day parade here in Virginia, where we live, and waved plenty of flags until the rain started, and then everyone had to flee.
Some kind of patriot
Christian-
you are. You just-
Yeah,
When it
exactly.
rains, you leave.
Fair weather patriot.
Yeah,
That's right.
Literally.
Thomas Paine just rolled over in his grave.
So I think Christian nationalism is about pursuing Christian power more than Christian principle. If you're one of the folks that says America's a Christian nation, I'm going to ask you, what's the government's role in that? If you think the government has a role in upholding or enforcing a predominant Christian cultural heritage, I'm going to call that Christian nationalism. I'm going to part ways with you. I do advocate justice, principles of fairness. I'll advocate for the life of the unborn, for religious freedom. And that's a Christian vision of society, but it doesn't amount to privileging my tribe.
That's good. You know, I've often noticed when Christians are very verbal in their criticism of a cancel society, that we advocated a cancel society for the last 2,000 years, and in our involvement in politics, and the Reformation had a political side to it, obviously, and the Inquisition had a political side to it. And when you kill off your enemies, that's kind of a cancel culture on steroids. So Christians have to be kind of careful. But we can be patriots, right?
Oh, absolutely. As I said, I actually think it's a positive Christian virtue to be grateful for the blessings that God has given us. It's a clear biblical command to cultivate gratitude and thankfulness in all situations. I'm grateful for America. Some people say I'm proud to be an American. I root patriotism more in gratitude than pride. I didn't accomplish being an American. That's not an achievement. So it sounds odd to be proud of it, but I'm grateful. I think it's a great country. And my patriotism leads me to want to make America a better place than what I found it as. Loving your country means loving the best version of it and working to make that real.
Doesn't it get to be difficult and our nation is very much divided. I'm an old guy, and it's a lot more divided than anything I've ever seen. And it's not just divided, it's angry. There is so much anger and hostility that's involved in our political discussions that you're almost afraid to bring up politics and to talk about it. Comment on that, if you would.
It's true that we are deeply divided, and there's a lot of anger out there. The more history I read, the more I think that that's not entirely unique to our era. The 1960s were tremendously polarized, and there was a lot more political violence in the 1960s than today. We are less divided than we were in the 1860s when the country fractured and went to civil war. I think we're actually less divided than we were in the 1790s, which was another really fractious time in our country's history. I think we tend to remember the 1930s, 40s, and 50s as a time of great national unity because we faced huge crises, the Depression, the war, the early Cold War. And it's true our nation was united then, but it's, I think, mistaken to think that that's the norm. We're actually more often divided than not. Culture war is an enduring feature of the American experiment. We've always disagreed on what it means to be an American.
And have we been able to discuss it in the past more than we can now? Has it always been this, you're not just wrong, you're evil kind of comment?
We have some unique challenges today, part of it driven by the internet, by social media, by our news environment, our information environment. But again, I guess I want to hold out some optimism that real public discourse is possible. I'm worried sometimes when I talk with younger folks that they are not learning the art of civic conversation the way I'd like to see it done. But again, I hold out hope that we can get past this.
If you have you with students, and we'll have to pursue this on the other side of the break. This is going some good places. And the religion of American greatness, what's wrong with Christian nationalism? And our guest is Paul D. Miller. This is very hard work, by the way. I know you don't think so because we make it look so easy. That's because we're professionals, but we're working hard here. And we have to have breaks where we make money, and breaks where we have cookies and milk, and breaks where we rest up. But like Jesus, and you can trust me on this, we are coming back. I say it often, but I really mean it. You always have a seat at our table. We're hanging out with Christian scholar, political theorist, veteran, former White House staffer, author Paul Miller. And you can keep up with Paul on Twitter at Paul D. Miller 2.
I apologize.
And you might want to go there if that is a place that you frequent very often. Before the break, and the break interrupted my profound thought, and I had to be reminded about what it was and the question I was going to ask. You teach at Georgetown, and that's a prestigious place to be. I would be really interested. I kind of had, and maybe my views are skewed, that most of academia are pretty much to the left of where I am, and that often political speech is not allowed unless it's the political speech that is shared by the culture, the corporate culture of academia. I would be interested in how you, and you're a patriot, and I liked your definition between the difference between Christian nationalism and patriotism. And you are a patriot, so how do you foster that kind of discussion with students who probably, by and large, don't agree with some of your views? That sounds to me like you could lose your job if you're not careful.
Well, you're not wrong about the ideological predominance at most universities. There is polling that bears this out. 80 to 90% of professors and students at most universities identify as Democrats, and the other 10% as socialists. Funny thing, though, I travel and speak on college campuses all around the country, and I usually ask them, tell me about the political temperature here. Without fail, they all say, we're not as crazy as the other universities.
That's funny. Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, there's this widespread perception that academia is just this place full of, crazy lefty social justice warriors, and there's a few of them out there. But I think, from my experience, while academia certainly leans left, it's mostly not the crazies. In a sense, the hard left, that emperor has no clothes, and we're all more afraid of them than we need to be. So you're asking me, how do I engage with my students? I try not to be afraid. I try to speak as plainly and truthfully as I can and to love my students. I can't use my position to evangelize. That's not, even though I'm at a Catholic university. But I do speak to my students regularly about the importance in their careers of honesty, integrity, courage, truthfulness. And these are all true things. And it's true that it's good for their careers, also good for their lives. And I don't get pushback. Students love this stuff. They know that they need to hear these kinds of messages. And I'm very happy to be there for them and to be the voice, I hope, of some reason.
Paul, quick story. When I was a kid, I was walking through the woods and accidentally stepped on where a bunch of hornets lived, and they swarmed me and were stinging me all over the place. And the only comparable experience I can align with that is the last time we had Eric Metaxas on, and all the all the people who responded, it was just literally stepping into a hornet's nest there. So I want to further kind of parse what you're saying, because what he would say is the idea of voting on your values and saying these things matter to us. We want to be vocal, use our vote and our voice to see these values put into action. Does that stray into Christian nationalism? And if Christian nationalism still falls beyond that, where's that crossing over point?
Yeah. Can we vote our values? It's a great question. And to prove that I'm academic, my answer is it depends.
You are in politics.
Yeah. And to further prove it, I can give you a threefold answer to this.
All right.
So pardon me if this turns into a lecture.
It's alliterative. I'm in.
Yeah. So the first, I think the answer is yes, we can vote our values, but there's a couple of questions I want to ask. Number one, the way that we vote our values, does it end up discriminating against a person or a group? Right? 100 years ago, Protestants voting for their values thought it was super important to ostracize Catholics from public life. That was it was widely held universal consensus that it's dangerous to entrust Catholics with political power. So they advocated for their values to keep the Catholics out. Today, are we on purpose or inadvertently keeping another group out, right? So that's a question we should ask ourselves. Second test would be, are our values administratively and logistically possible to enforce at the point of law? So again, 100 years ago, prohibition. Christians got together and passed a constitutional amendment to ban the sale and transportation of alcohol. It's a terrible mistake. It backfired spectacularly, right? The nation rejected it. There was armed gang warfare in American streets for a decade. It was just a really bad idea. So today, are there any things that we advocate that are good things but might not work as a matter of law? I hear people calling to ban pornography. And I agree that pornography is evil, but I'm not persuaded that there is a way technologically or logistically or legally to actually criminalize the entire industry. We can talk about cyber zoning or whatnot. That would make sense, but I don't think we can make that happen as a point of law. I got a third point, but I can hold on.
Go ahead. Let's hear it.
Yeah. Third point is just about is about recognizing the different jurisdictions that God gave to government and God gave to the church. Right? Sometimes called separation of church and state. I know Christians are a little wary about that language, but I think it's clear in Scripture. God made government, gave it one charge to uphold order and justice. He created the church to regulate the right worship of himself. And we need to be careful about respecting those boundaries. So I would not actually advocate prayer in public schools. I think prayer should be led by ministers of the gospel, not by Caesar. And public employees of public schools, that's Caesar. And Caesar makes a really bad Sunday school teacher. So that's an example of how I would respect the boundaries between church and state.
That's good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Paul, you talk about political tribes, and historically they seem to be defined by identity, racial identity, ethnic background, things like that. In your Christian nationalism, I gather you're, trying to veer away from that kind of identification. Well, we're running into but maybe we can ask you to comment on that as we come back and what the distinction would be in avoiding those kinds of traps or the difficulties with those kinds of identities.
But not now. In the industry, that's called a teaser. And if you've listened up to this point, you're not going anywhere. The book is The Religion of American Greatness, What's Wrong with Christian Nationalism. And so we're going to back out, give Paul a moment to think about his answer to this, because a lot of critical people are listening, and he wants to be balanced and Christian. Talking to Paul Miller, and his book is called The Religion of American Greatness, What's Wrong with Christian Nationalism. This book has been out about a year, and it's probably as timely as any book I know about. I mean, we really need to talk about these issues, and we need to be honest and open with one another, and we need to leave our Rugers at home, because it's just, we've got to talk.
Rigor, not Ruger. Paul.
No, Ruger.
You talk about, before the break, the question was along the lines of your discussion about political tribes, and historically they've been identity-based, racial, ethnic associations. Christian nationalism seems like it runs a risk of falling into traps there and making the distinction between the ideals of America and patriotism and so forth. Can you comment some on that?
Yeah, this is a really complicated question. Look, I think to some extent we are naturally tribal creatures. Tribalism is built into human nature. We always associate with groups. We identify with groups. So we cannot simply get rid of tribes. But I'd say two things. One is that Christian isn't a tribe. And I fear that Christian nationalism treats our religious identity as just another tribal identifier. In that sense, it kind of demeans the gospel by turning our loyalty to Jesus as just another group to affiliate with, on par with our political identities, our sports fandoms, and whatnot. And so I would want us to understand that Christianity is, the people who follow Jesus come from every tribe, tongue, people, and nation on earth, as it says in Revelation 7. So we need to keep that in mind. The second thing is that in politics, we need to be careful not to mistake our tribe for the nation as a whole. We come from particular groups, but America as a whole also comprises many, many different tribes and groups and peoples. And I think that sometimes Christians, particularly white Christians, have had a tendency to act and think as if we are the nation and everyone else is a guest. And I would not want to make that mistake. I want to make sure that as a Christian, I treat everyone else equally and fairly. That's a Christian principle, actually, is to extend that hospitality to my fellow citizens, even if they're of a different tribe than I am.
So tribal politics is not necessarily bad or good, it just is.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair statement.
Do you think it's on steroids in our time, or is it the way it's always been?
Yeah, I think it is on steroids. We talk about identity politics, the balkanization of America. Every group now has its own grievance and its own agenda. That, again, is on steroids. I worry that we were losing a common sense of a civic self. Tribalism, pretty natural in our lives. We don't always have to organize our politics along those tribal lines.
Do you identify as a Christian in your academic career? I mean, would people say, yeah, Paul, he's a good guy, he's a Christian, or would they be surprised to find out that you were? And I don't mean identify that you wear a sign that says you're going to hell if you don't believe what I believe.
Right.
But just your faith is a core of who you are.
In every one of the 4 books I've written, I've mentioned it at least somewhere.
Yeah.
It's less explicit in my earlier books, obviously very explicit in this one on Christian nationalism. But even in my book on grand strategy, I quote extensively from a theologian named Reinhold Niebuhr, and I share how my Christian faith has informed my understanding of America's role in the world and American foreign policy.
Niebuhr is one of my heroes, by the way, and I agree with you, especially in his view of culture and society and its fallen nature, and not recognizing that we're really screwed up people and probably can't help it. I think you've kind of affirmed that in this interview when you've talked about tribalism being, that doesn't mean that's good, but it certainly is, and it's a part of what fallen nature should be defined as, or at which fallen nature should be defined if you're an English teacher and an academic.
And that's all the more reason why we need to guard against the possible dangers of tribalism. There's a lot of approaches to tribalism that just embraces it and says, let's go for it. Again, it's the identity politics on steroids. And there's a version of it on the right that leads to white nationalism. And I want to say, look, I understand we're tribal creatures, but we need to recognize the dangers of our tribes or of our tribalism and not ground our politics on nothing but our tribal identity.
That's good stuff. And that may be our witness, do you think? Maybe the witness that we make is not one of our political stance, and it's not having a political stance. It's rather the understanding that we're a part of something that's a lot bigger than that, and a lot more important, and a lot accepting. You know, the question, will there be belly dancers in heaven? How about transition people? I have a transition dog who's a girl and thinks she's a boy. Can my dog go to heaven? Those are interesting questions. and maybe we're going to reconcile some of that.
We just proved how serious this program is.
Guys, we'll continue with the conversation. Don't go anywhere. With Paul Miller, and his book is The Religion of American Greatness, and what's wrong with Christian nationalism. There's nothing wrong with patriotism, and this weekend you need to be waving your flag and be grateful that you're a part of this nation. We've been handed some really good stuff, and sometimes we forget. But when you take your flag and hit everybody who disagrees with you over the head with it, that's probably not a good witness.
Paul, I wanted to just really quickly follow up on a comment that you made I think it was in the first segment, and you were mentioning about how Protestants or Christians or whatever, and the whole issue with Roman Catholics, you know, back in the 50s, et cetera. And I was way too young to vote in the election when John F. Kennedy was running. But I remember vividly the conversations. To his credit, the pastor of my home church never did anything political from the pulpit, never said anything, but it certainly was a general conversation. I remember it well throughout members of the church that there's just no way that you can vote for a Roman Catholic. And I just, I was a very young kid and I just accepted that. Okay, we can't vote for Catholics. You project that ahead to post 9/11, and those kinds of scenarios where all of a sudden you can't be friends with, you can't identify with, you can't have anything to do with anybody who is Muslim or, that kind of thing. Is that like what we were just talking about in the last segment? Is that like the same type of thing only on steroids? Because it seems like over the years it's gotten worse and worse in our ability to be able to have civil discourse and be accepting. I'm not going to change my views on Jesus, obviously, but I think you know what I'm trying to ask.
Yeah, I think that that kind of instinct has always been here in America, whether it's Catholics 100 years ago, Muslims after 9/11. I think a lot of Christians in America maybe have this sort of stance towards the LGBTQ community.
Right.
If there's any community that feels most dangerous to our values, it would be that one. And that's where I think we are kind of most tested in our citizenship. Can we recognize them as fellow citizens while holding to our values and our beliefs about human sexuality? I think that's the important thing to do is, hey, we believe what we believe, but you're a human, you're made in the image of God. We disagree, but I'm going to advocate for your equality under law, which says we can believe different things.
Okay.
Doesn't that
Did I answer your question?
Yes.
But that does go both ways, doesn't it?
It should absolutely go both ways. That's the great thing about the principle of free speech and religious freedom. It's religious freedom for thee and for me. We can't be advocating for only our freedoms, but not theirs as well. So if we want the freedom of association, speech, press, worship, everything, then we have to grant it to everyone else as well. And the good news is we're winning in this respect. Religious freedom, true principled religious freedom, is actually more well established in American law today than ever before. We used to have Christian predominance, really Protestant predominance, but not really religious freedom for all Americans. And today we actually have a more robust legal protections for everyone.
Yeah.
Paul, I was wondering if you give some other illustrations of where you see Christian nationalism kind of in the wild and kind of expand on some of the dangers of that. I mean, is the idea of American exceptionalism, is that something that veers into too far into that direction?
So there's a historian and author named John Wilsey who's written a great book on this exact subject. And I think it's called American Exceptionalism. And he talks about two versions of American exceptionalism. He calls one of them open American exceptionalism. It simply says America is and should be an exemplar of freedom and equality and justice. That's a great thing, and that's not Christian nationalism. That's like, hey, we should strive for justice so that other people can also see a model and example of justice. Then there is a version that he calls closed American exceptionalism that is national self-righteousness and can be militaristic and belligerent, and that is bad and can become idolatrous and quite dangerous.
Oh man,
what about our as Christians, we're citizens of a larger kingdom. We are citizens of God's kingdom, and then properly, gratefully, patriots of America, and then trying to sort of, how would you say, share the ideals of America in other cultures, in other lands, while trying to be accepting from a Christian standpoint. Is there a role for that push, if you will?
Sounds like you're asking, can we advocate for democracy abroad?
For example, yeah.
Yeah.
Christian ideals, freedoms.
Yeah. So there's do I advocate for that as an American, and do I advocate for that as a Christian? And it's kind of a similar question, and I'll give similar answers that both more or less answer yes. I think that there's no Christian case for tyranny, and there's no Christian case for anarchy. I think there's a Christian case for ordered liberty, where there's a framework of public order and justice, and then you kind of leave people alone to live their lives. I think there's a Christian case for that. I think our modern institutions of democracy and rights is a pretty good expression of that. And like half the world agrees. If you look around the world over the last 250 years, in every culture, in every civilization, every continent has adapted some version of that. And it's only, China, Russia, and a few others that really are holdouts. So I'm pretty optimistic that some kind of free society is possible in every cultural context. It's going to look different than American democracy, but I advocate for it because I think it's strategically good for America, and I think it's also a good path to human flourishing. And I, as a Christian, I want to see that all around the world.
Paul, we are out of time, and I don't know where this is going. I think you've given us some basic and really good, profound stuff that are basic principles by which we can live. And of course, the devil is in the details. Maybe once we get the principles laid down, this is what a Christian patriot should be, then we got to say, but does that include, and then get your list. And everybody has a list. And mine is right and yours is wrong.
Well, I'll be happy to come back for a second hour.
All right. We love it.
That'd be great.
Paul, you're great. Thank you so much for being with us. The name of his book, and you ought to get it. It'd be a great book to study in a small group in your church. Religion of American Greatness. What's Wrong with Christian Nationalism? Guys, we are coming back, and we will come back next week. And next week, we'll have another guest. And we'll tell you who that person is, and you are going to be amazed, as you were during this particular broadcast. So sit there. Don't go anywhere. That was a good hour and a thoughtful hour. Frankly, and we haven't read the book. We have a digital form of it, and we're going to get the book soon, but this turned out to be a lot better than I feared. I thought, Kathy, you got a guest who's to the left of me, and I know
Everyone's
everybody
to the left of you.
is to the left of me, but I mean way to the left of me, and it turned out that wasn't true. So you done good. And the things he's talking about, and we were talking during the break too, about some of the details, and it would be good to sit down and talk about some of those details, because I suspect that Paul has being in an academic situation, even some of the views that he shared today would be kind of dangerous. But I'd like to get into that and find it more. So I'd like to put Eric Metaxas and Paul in the studio, and then we could all go somewhere and get a Coke while they worked it out and say, give us the results of having worked it out. And we could come in and have a funeral.
That would be a conversation, wouldn't it? Wow.
But there really is something. There's George was talking during the break about the libertarian side of Paul and some of the things that he said. There is a libertarian side to the Christian faith. I think too often we have pretended to be a culture's mother, and we're not. I think we need to say, I'll leave you alone, but you leave me alone too. And we can make this thing work. And I think in that kind of context and that kind of honesty, the Christian faith is the best of all possible options. But the problem, you can only share it within the context of that libertarian side that says, I'm not your mother, and I'm not going to force you into anything. You tell me what you think, and I'll tell you what I think, and then we'll walk off together. And I think in those contexts, in almost every case, and I've seen it over and over again, people come running to Jesus. And that's a good thing to remember in terms of evangelistic tools. Who's going to be here next week?
Next week, Scott McKnight, and his book is titled Revelation for the Rest of Us, a prophetic call to follow Jesus as a dissident disciple.
Oh, another controversial program.
Excellent.
We'll fight over premillennialism and whether that's true and when the rapture is going to take place. And no, it's not about that, is it?
You know, you're always looking for a problem.
Guys, you join us next week. Same time, same place. And between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.
Could we have a deep and wide berth?
A deep and wide berth.
Goodness sakes.